I never imagined that betrayal could feel like a physical wound. At 38, I thought I had seen enough of life to recognize danger when it approached, but nothing prepared me for the day I watched the man I had loved for 15 years laugh with another woman in the kitchen we once built together. My name is Vanessa Cole, and this is not just the story of a marriage ending. It is the story of how love rots from the inside when greed and arrogance take over, and how the person you trust most can turn into your greatest enemy. That night, I stood in the shadows of my own home watching my husband Ethan whisper with his mother. I used to think Linda, my mother-in-law, was harmless, sharp-tongued, yes, but irrelevant in the grand scheme of my marriage. I had no idea that she would become the weapon he used to destroy me. I should have known Ethan wasn't the quiet, absent-minded man I had dismissed him to be. I should have seen the steel in his silence, the calculation in his stillness. But I didn't. I was too blinded by the fantasy of freedom with Marcus, the man who made me feel alive again after years of being invisible. I can admit it now, I thought I was smart. I thought I had played my cards perfectly. For months, I met Marcus in secret, whispering promises into his ear, while convincing myself that Ethan would never notice. I believed I could walk into a courtroom, sign some papers, and walk away with half of everything my husband had built, half of his empire, his sweat, his sacrifices. I imagined villas in Tuscany, new beginnings, a life of luxury where I was finally the one in control. But arrogance is a poison, and it dripped slowly into every decision I made. The day of the divorce hearing, I wore my best suit, my most confident smile, and the certainty that by evening I would be free and rich. I sat across from Ethan, who looked as if he had aged 10 years in the last 6 months. His gray eyes gave nothing away, but I told myself it was because he was defeated. My attorney whispered strategies into my ear, assuring me we had this case locked down. The law was on my side, the numbers were staggering, and Ethan had no idea what was coming. Or so I thought. When Judge Carter asked Ethan about his assets, I leaned forward, waiting for the confirmation of my victory. The number would be enormous, hundreds of millions, maybe more, enough to drown myself in diamonds and travels in a new life. But then Ethan smiled. It wasn't the smile of a broken man. It was the smile of someone who had been waiting, planning, and relishing the moment of my downfall. 0. The judge read aloud from the documents Ethan had handed over. The word cracked like a gunshot through the courtroom. 0. My stomach dropped, my ears rang, and for the first time in months I felt fear. Not fear of losing money, but fear of realizing that I had underestimated the very man I had once vowed to honor. My attorney protested, accusing Ethan of fraud, of deception, of hiding wealth, but Judge Carter shook her head. Every transfer had been legal, every paper notarized, and the assets. They were no longer his, they belonged to his mother. The prenup I had once signed without thought now returned like a ghost to haunt me. Infidelity voided everything. All my careful plans, all my whispered promises to Marcus, all my dreams of freedom, they crumbled in a single afternoon. I looked at Ethan, then truly looked at him, and for the first time I saw the man behind the silence. He wasn't angry, he wasn't vindictive, he was empty. And in that emptiness I understood something chilling. He had not only beaten me, he had erased me from the life I thought I was about to steal. The courtroom air was thick, suffocating, as though every whispered lie and hidden betrayal I had ever lived through was pressing down on my chest. My pen slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor, but I couldn't bend to pick it up. My legs wouldn't move. My husband, my Ethan, had gutted me with a single word, and the entire room was watching me drown in it. The judge's gavel struck sharp and final, but I barely heard her voice. My attorney's protest blurred into white noise. All I could see was Ethan's face, calm, unreadable, with the faintest trace of satisfaction at the corners of his mouth. That expression seared itself into me. It wasn't anger, it wasn't hate, it was victory. Cold, calculated victory. I stumbled out of the courthouse that day with cameras flashing in my face. Journalists shouted questions hungry for scandal. "Mrs. Cole, is it true you walked away with nothing? Did you cheat on your husband?" Their voices clawed at me, pulling me apart. I shielded my face, pushing past them, but their words cut deeper than any knife. They were laughing at me. They knew. Everyone knew. At home, Marcus tried to comfort me, but I could barely look at him. He was supposed to be my escape, my salvation, the proof that I was still wanted, still alive. Instead, he became a mirror reflecting my downfall. His touch, once intoxicating, now burned my skin with shame. I snapped at him, pushed him away, but the truth was simpler and crueler. I hated him because I hated myself. Ethan's mother, Linda, wasted no time twisting the knife. She showed up at the house I was forced to leave, standing smugly on the porch, as movers carried out the last of my things. "Did you really think you could outplay us?" she asked, her voice syrupy with malice. "Ethan may have been quiet, but he's my son. He learned from me. You never stood a chance." I wanted to scream at her to claw that smirk off her face. Instead, I bit my tongue until it bled. I couldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break, but inside I was already shattered. Days turned into weeks and the walls closed in. The apartment I rented was small, sterile, a cage compared to the mansion I had once called home. I stared at the empty closets, the hollow echo of my footsteps, and realized I had traded a kingdom for ashes. Marcus grew distant, tired of my bitterness. One night, he didn't come home at all. The betrayal that had once fueled me now mocked me. Karma had made me its target, and I had no one left to blame but myself. But even in my despair, anger flickered like an ember refusing to die. Ethan had stripped me of everything, but he had underestimated one thing: my ability to rise from the ruins. He thought he had erased me, but he hadn't. I was still here, and if he could play games with secrets and lies, so could I. I began to dig. Old documents, financial records, whispers from people who owed me favors. I followed every trail like a bloodhound. Ethan may have transferred everything to his mother, but I knew men like him. Men who built empires always left cracks behind. Hidden accounts, quiet deals, skeletons buried in ledgers instead of closets. The more I uncovered, the more I realized Ethan's world was not as spotless as he pretended. And Linda, oh Linda, her hands were dirtier than anyone's. Bribes, laundered money, transactions tied to names that carried weight in dangerous circles. They thought I was finished, but they had built their empire on quicksand. All I had to do was step lightly and wait for the ground to give way. And so I waited, plodding in silence, wearing my defeat like a mask. Because if Ethan believed he had written the final chapter of our story, he was wrong. I still had a pen. And I intended to write an ending he would never see coming. I remember the first night I sat alone in that cramped apartment, the one with peeling paint and a window that looked out over nothing but an alley filled with trash cans. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass and whispered to myself, "This is what you wanted, isn't it, freedom?" But freedom felt more like exile. I was stripped of the life I had built, banished from the comforts I had once taken for granted. The irony was cruel. I had traded love for lust, security for illusion, and in return I was left with nothing but the echo of my own mistakes. Still, as much as guilt gnawed at me, a deeper fire kept burning. Betrayal is never one-sided. Ethan had played me as much as I had played him. His silence had not been the silence of a broken man. It had been the silence of a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. I began to replay our marriage in my mind, dissecting every smile, every shrug, every late night he had spent in his office. How many times had he lied to me while I was busy lying to him? How many times had he looked at me and seen not a wife, but a liability? Linda's words haunted me. "You never stood a chance." It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. Ethan and his mother had written me off as a fool, a pawn to be sacrificed. They thought I would crumble and fade quietly into obscurity, but they underestimated me. They always had. I started with whispers. Old friends of Ethan's ex-colleagues who had been discarded, people Linda had bullied or intimidated. Over wine, over coffee, sometimes over hushed phone calls late at night, I pieced together fragments of their stories. Ethan's empire wasn't as clean as the court had painted it. There were offshore accounts, shell companies, investments that smelled of blood and smoke, and behind so much of it, Linda's signature. One man, a former accountant who had been paid handsomely to disappear, told me something that made my heart stop. Your husband's net worth isn't zero, it's hidden. He shifted it all before you ever filed for divorce. But it's still his. On paper, it's hers, but in reality, it's his. That was the key. Linda was the mask, but Ethan was still pulling the strings. And if I could prove that I could take back what had been stolen from me not for the money alone, but for the vindication, for the chance to stand in front of Ethan and Linda and make them see me not as a fool, but as the woman who outplayed them both. I began documenting everything. Copies of transactions, names, dates. I kept it all in a plain black notebook, one I carried with me everywhere. I became obsessive, consumed. Marcus noticed, of course. He accused me of living in the past, of clinging to revenge. But what did he know? He had already begun to drift, looking for a woman less broken, less haunted. I let him go. He had served his purpose and I no longer needed him. My war was no longer about passion, it was about justice. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A charity gala of all places. I hadn't been invited, of course, but I knew Linda would be there parading around in jewels purchased with the fortune she had stolen. I slipped in with a borrowed gown and a forged invitation, my heart pounding like a drum as I moved through the glittering crowd. And there she was, radiant and venomous, laughing with men whose names were whispered in boardrooms and courtrooms alike. I stayed in the shadows watching, listening, and then I heard it, her careless words spoken with too much wine in her glass. Ethan trusts me with everything. He couldn't survive without me. Even if the world burned, I'd still be holding the deeds. I recorded every word. My hands shook as I held the phone, but I kept it steady, because in that moment I knew I had her. Walking out of that gala, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: power. It was faint, fragile, but it was mine. For so long I had been drowning in shame, but now I was breathing again, because I finally saw the path forward. Ethan thought he had written me out of his story, but I was about to become the ending he never expected. The morning after the gala, I sat at my kitchen table with my black notebook spread open, the recording of Linda's drunken boast playing over and over. Her voice filled the silence, each arrogant syllable cutting sharper than the last. For months I had been stumbling in the dark, but now the cracks in their armor were visible. All I needed was the right pressure to make the entire facade collapse. I thought about Ethan then, about the man I had once fallen in love with. I remembered the nights we stayed up until dawn, dreaming about a future we thought we'd build together. I remembered how proud he looked the day he signed his first big contract, how he whispered to me that none of it would matter if he didn't have me by his side. Where had that man gone, or had he ever existed at all? Maybe he had always been the man I saw in court, the one who smiled while erasing me from existence. The thought made me sick, but it also fueled me. I began mapping out a plan. I couldn't go to the police yet. They'd see me as a bitter ex-wife spinning tales of revenge. No, I needed something irrefutable. I needed to expose not just Linda's words, but the proof behind them. So I started digging into the charities she flaunted, the shell companies linked to her name. The deeper I went, the dirtier it became. Donations that never reached their cause, funds that circled back into private accounts, property deeds that shifted between hands like cards in a magician's trick. One night, after hours of chasing paper trails, I found an account hidden in the Cayman Islands, tied directly to Ethan, though masked under Linda's name. The numbers were staggering. Millions upon millions that had been siphoned away, all while Ethan swore under oath that he had nothing left. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. This was it. This was the key to their undoing. But I wasn't ready to strike just yet. I wanted Ethan to feel it the way I had felt it in that courtroom. The humiliation, the shock, the helplessness of realizing the ground beneath your feet has given way. I wanted him to see me rise from the ashes he left me in, stronger than before, unafraid. And most of all, I wanted him to know it was me who had destroyed him, the woman he dismissed as weak and foolish. In the weeks that followed, I crafted my persona carefully. I let the world see a broken woman licking her wounds, fading into obscurity. I let Ethan and Linda believe I had surrendered. Meanwhile, I built my case brick by brick. I reached out quietly to investigative journalists, the kind who salivated over stories of corruption and scandal. I shared pieces of what I had found enough to whet their appetite, but not enough to give away the ending. And then I waited. The moment came sooner than I expected. Another court date, this time over a minor property dispute Linda had filed to further tighten her grip. I walked into that courtroom not as a victim, but as a predator who had finally learned how to hunt. Ethan was there, calm as ever, his mother perched beside him like a vulture. They didn't even glance at me, certain I was irrelevant. But when the judge asked if anyone had additional evidence to present, I stood. My voice was steady, though my heart thundered in my chest. I handed over the documents I had collected, the recordings, the transfers, the offshore accounts. The judge's eyes widened as she flipped through the files. The silence in that room was deafening, broken only by Linda's gasp when she realized what was happening. For the first time, Ethan's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkened, and in that tiny shift I saw it: fear. The same fear I had carried for months, the fear that everything you've built is about to crumble. As the judge called for a recess to review the evidence, I turned to face Ethan. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply looked at him, steady and unflinching, and whispered so only he could hear: checkmate. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. The recess stretched into hours, and I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, the weight of years pressing down on me. My black notebook rested on my lap, pages worn from the constant turning of my fingers. People passed by, whispering, staring, but I hardly noticed. All I could hear was the thundering echo of Ethan's silence, his mask slipping for just a moment, revealing the fear he had hidden so well. That single crack was enough to keep me steady. When the bailiff finally called us back, the room felt different. The air was heavier, charged, as if everyone sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. The judge looked at me, then at Ethan and Linda, her expression grave. She began reading aloud the evidence I had presented, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Offshore accounts, fraudulent transfers, charitable donations that never reached their intended recipients. Every word was another stone stacked onto the mountain that would soon crush them. Linda tried to interrupt, her shrill voice echoing through the chamber, but the judge silenced her with a gavel strike. Mrs. Cole has presented sufficient preliminary evidence to warrant a full investigation, she declared. My heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with vindication. For once, I wasn't the fool. For once, I wasn't the one on trial. I turned my eyes toward Ethan. He sat rigid, his hands folded tightly in front of him, his knuckles white. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I could feel his fury radiating across the room, a silent storm brewing behind those gray eyes. But beneath it, I saw something else too: resignation. He knew. The empire he and his mother had built on lies was beginning to collapse, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The hearing adjourned, and I walked out into the sunlight, the world suddenly brighter, sharper. Reporters swarmed me again, their questions firing like bullets. Mrs. Cole, how did you discover this? Do you think your ex-husband will face prison time? Was this your plan all along? I said nothing, only held my head high and walked past them. The story would tell itself soon enough. That night I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the city lights through the window. For the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped. I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. But beneath the rush of triumph, a hollow ache remained. I had won a battle, yes, but at what cost? The man I once loved was now my enemy, and I had become someone I barely recognized. Ruthless, hardened, alone. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen. You think this is over? It's not. You've made a powerful enemy. My blood ran cold. I didn't need to ask who it was from. Ethan's voice echoed in those words, a promise of war yet to come. I closed my eyes and let the fear wash over me, then forced myself to breathe. He wanted me afraid. He wanted me to back down. But I had survived the humiliation, the betrayal, the emptiness. I had clawed my way back from the ashes, and I wasn't about to surrender now. I picked up my notebook and wrote a single line across the next empty page. If he wants a war, I'll give him one. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about revenge or justice. I was thinking about survival. And I was ready. Because Ethan may have erased me once, but now I was the ghost in his empire, the one haunting him with every move he made. And this time I wasn't leaving until the empire crumbled to dust. At that moment, I knew this wasn't just the end of a marriage or a divorce settlement gone wrong. This was the beginning of something much darker. And deep down, I could already feel it. There would be no winners when this war was finally over. Only survivors.